I started the Wheel of Time. Let's talk about it. So I read The Eye of the World. I have a lot to say about it, and I thought that it would be fun to share my experience reading with this book on my channel because it's such an iconic book. It's so popular and so well loved that I just wanted to share the experience. So yeah, this is not like a review. It's literally just going to be me talking about my feelings while I read the book and about the series as a whole, and looking forward to the rest of the series. I guess I should say, just in case anyone stumbled across this video that's not aware of this series, I doubt there's many fantasy fans out there, but you never know. So The Wheel of Time is a 14 or 15 book series, depending on if you count the prequel book or not, written by Robert Jordan and concluded by Brandon Sanderson. So the main story is 14 books, and then there's a prequel book that I think often gets lumped in to kind of round it out to a 15-book series. It's an epic fantasy series about defeating the Dark One. I think. I'm really not far enough into the series to be able to say that for sure at this point that that's what it's about, but that's what I think it's about. So I'm gonna start kind of spoiler free here. We'll just keep everything spoiler free, and then as I move more into my specific thoughts and what I liked and disliked about this book, I'm going to be getting into spoilers. Before we get into talking about the book, I do just want to make a disclaimer that this is not my first experience with Wheel of Time. My first experience was actually watching the TV show. I watched season 1 of the show, and to be honest, I didn't like it hardly at all. I really don't think it was a well-made show. It was not well written. There were some parts of the show I liked, like little parts that I thought were cool, but mostly, nah. I didn't even come back to watch the second season, honestly. Like, I just didn't care enough about it to want to come back and continue on. So since that was my first introduction to the story, I'm probably going to end up making some comparisons to the show. I wouldn't put it past myself just because, it's hard to separate those two things in your mind sometimes, the two different kind of iterations of it. And it's just kind of what my mind was doing subconsciously while I was reading. So just in case I start going off about the show, I don't know if I will, but just in case I do, that's why. I will say that, wow, the book was so much better than the show. I mean, I knew it was going to be. Obviously, people didn't love the series for no reason, but suffice it to say, I found the book to be such a better story. Okay, so some overall thoughts on the book. This is my spoiler-free section. First off, I will say that I very, very much enjoyed this book. Ever since I started reading adult fantasy, I really got more into the modern side of it, not so much the classic side. So honestly, I really haven't read that much of your classic epic quest hero's journey type of story. So reading this book just felt really refreshing to me because it felt like I was getting back to the roots of the fantasy genre. If I was a different reader, perhaps someone who was more well seasoned in the fantasy genre, I might have had a different experience. So I'm really glad that I read this now at this point in my life and my reading journey. I think it worked really well. The book was really exciting. It ended up being kind of a page turner for me. I always wanted to get back into this world to see what was going to happen and where the characters were going to go and what was going to happen to them. And you know what? Let's just say I'm not the biggest fan of epic fantasy. It's probably one of my least favorite fantasy subgenres. So I was honestly kind of worried that I wasn't going to like this book, but thankfully, I did really enjoy it. I think if I really were to tell you why this one succeeded to me where others didn't, I would have to do a lot of comparisons and just play the comparison game a lot and name names and name book, and so it would take too much time for me to go through every reason why this worked where others didn't. And I'm not going to do that. That might be an idea for a later video, but just for now, know that for me, as a self-proclaimed epic fantasy hater, strong word, but, I liked The Eye of the World. I'll expand more into my specific positives and negatives later in this video, but I just did want to make a quick note that I very much fell into the camp of liking this book and feeling overall really positive about it. So next in this section, let me just reference the Lord of the Rings influence. I knew that that was going to be a thing going into this. I knew that The Eye of the World specifically was very much inspired by the Lord of the Rings. It's very easy to see the influence, especially when you know it's there. There's so many direct comparisons. I mean, the entire traveling party is basically almost a one-for-one direct comparison of the Fellowship. And orcs and Trollocs are very similar. You've got the Nazgul and Myrddraal. I don't know if that's how you pronounce it. And then the Two Rivers and the Shire are really similar too. And just the story kind of conventions overall are just all very similar. Same with the naming conventions. Like, I felt like a lot of Robert Jordan's location names and character names and all that stuff were very reminiscent of the Lord of the Rings and the magic system as well. I mean, you got the one power and the one ring, you know. But I do think that if I didn't know beforehand that this was based on the Lord of the Rings, I'm honestly not sure that I would have picked it up. I don't know that I really want to make assumptions on that end, but a lot of times I don't pick up these things, to be very honest with you. I could see how at the time this was released, though, it could have been more obvious. And maybe at the time it was released, maybe Robert Jordan was more forthcoming with his inspiration. I'm not really sure, but to me, like, it really just didn't bother me at all. It didn't affect my enjoyment. I could tell it was there, but I didn't care. So yes, overall, very, very much liked this book. I had a great time reading it. I can't wait to go on to the next one. I would recommend it if you're a fantasy fan. If you're not a big fantasy fan, it's pretty heavily high fantasy with a lot of, you know, a whole new secondary world. There's a lot of magic systems going on and characters and places. So I don't know, you might not like it, but for any fantasy fan, I think, you know, you ought to give it a try. Okay, so let's move on to the spoiler section. I'm going to get into specific things that I liked and didn't like, and it's going to be spoiler filled. So warning. Okay, so let's start with what I liked. First of all, this book followed some very classic fantasy tropes, and I think it executed them really well. You could call it cliche, and that's, you know, fair. But for me, I think, you know, there were a lot of commonalities of fantasy books that popped up here. But I do think that Jordan was just so sincere with these things and with his portrayal of everything that I couldn't help but just to feel really excited by it. My two major points of interest with this book and what really just drew me in were the world building and the plot. Let's start with the plot. As I said before, this is not a super unique or innovative plot, at least not as a reader in 2024. But I just really, really liked reading this classic fantasy journey quest story. I am such a sucker for a good just defeating the evil lord type of plot. Like just your classic good versus world destroying evil plot. I received these kinds of stories with varying levels of enjoyment, but it did really work here. I liked the simplicity here, especially since we knew from the beginning that, you know, this is kind of going to be the conflict of the stories, defeating the Dark One. I liked it. The beginning of the story was amazing. I loved it. I loved the anticipation of the adventure starting. Because I watched the show and just hearing people talk about the story in general, I knew that Moraine getting to the Two Rivers was a very important point in the story, and she was important in getting the story started. If we're comparing it with Lord of the Rings, I don't think I liked it here as much as I did in Lord of the Rings. I loved seeing the Shire. I loved the way that Tolkien made us feel about the Shire. I don't really care about the Two Rivers. It just really seemed like your run-of-the-mill farming town. So I don't really care about the place itself that much. At least not yet. I don't know if I will in the future, but yet I'm just like, it's fine. But I did still kind of like seeing, you know, the calm before the storm. That was fun. I do also think that some of the creepy elements of this story were done really well, like Shadar Logoth. Spine-tingling. It was so interesting and creepy, and I loved it. And the same with when they were in the Ways, the Black Wind. Oh my gosh, there was a part when Loyal was like, light the black wind. I got chills at that part. I was like, oh my God. I loved it. I love the horror elements in this book. I also like that the Emmonsfielders, besides Nynaeve, of course, were teenagers, especially compared to the show where they're all kind of young adults. You forgive them so much more when they're younger. It endeared me to them so much more. And it just made their inexperience with the world so much more relatable and understandable. As far as the pacing side of the plot, I liked it and I didn't like it. I'll get into some of my issues with the length of the book in a later section, but as far as what I liked about it, I really liked that information about the world and the threats and the magic was revealed bit by bit. I really liked that about the pacing. And that's almost where I didn't mind the pacing of the book as much, because as long as I was learning new info, I was happy. Where I have issues with other really long fantasy books is where they start to stagnate and nothing happens and nothing new is learned. So I do think Jordan did a decent job with the pacing here. Okay, on to the world building. The world building was by and far my favorite part of this book. I was so entranced by this world. There are so many elements to it that I find so fascinating. And if I didn't like the plot, the characters, nothing, I think I would keep going with this and just be so into the story based on the world building alone. It was that good to me. It definitely feels like a lived in world, and everything feels placed to make the story and the world so much more big and epic. The bits of history that were dropped felt so important and so relevant. Also, as a side note of the world building, the magic system was so interesting. I really liked what we learned about it in this book, as well as the other magic systems in place in the world. I feel like we got hints of other types of magic that are being used, like especially with the Wolf Brothers, for example. I don't think that's connected to the One Power. It didn't seem like it as far as I can remember. So I'm curious if there's going to be more other systems of magic in place. I want to learn about it all. I think they seem so creative and so fascinating. The whole world just felt so magical and mystical and mysterious to me that I just feel like a kid in a candy store at this point with Wheel of Time. I'm just gazing all around me in wonder. I also love the themes of fate and time in this. It gives the story a very grand scale and feel, and it makes it feel larger than life. Makes me excited to see where Jordan will take things. So I've raved about the story for a while. Let's get into some of the things I didn't like as much and some of the little negatives and problems I had. So first of all, as I kind of hinted at before, one of my issues was the length of the book. I do think this book was too long. I struggled at some parts where I was just like, oh my God, let's get on with it already. Like, I've been reading this for so long and there's still so much left to go. I just wanted to get through it already. I feel like we saw too much of some journeys, like some of the character journeys. Some parts of the different storylines definitely could have been cut, I feel like. This is one of my biggest issues with a lot of epic fantasy and why I just in general don't really like the genre super well. And as much as I did enjoy myself reading this book, I do still wish it had been edited down a bit. Also, the characters. I didn't really love any of the characters. In fact, I would say I didn't like or didn't care about more of them than I did like. I feel like there's only 3 characters I could really say that I liked by the end of the story. That would be probably Moraine, Rand, and Tom. I really liked the 3 of them. The others, like, I just didn't really care about so much, especially Matt. Poor Matt. I kind of feel like he got the short end of the stick in this book because a lot of what happened in this book was kind of out of his control because of the dagger that he got. So, like, yeah, he was a little bit of a prick in this book. A little bit of an idiot sometimes. But I'm trying not to judge him as a character too harshly yet because, again, I know that he probably wasn't really acting like himself. So I am excited to see where Jordan goes with him and what is in store for him in the later books because I want to give him a chance, basically, to be himself. And there were some interesting things hinted at for him earlier on in the book. So, like, I'm a little bit intrigued by him. We'll see. Also, Lan is cool, but I don't love him. I don't really love him yet. And then Perrin, Egwene, and Nynaeve, the other Emmons Fielders, they all are just like meh to me. I don't really care about them. I'll reserve judgment till later, I think, for all of them. No strong feelings either way at this point. Usually when this happens and I don't love most of the characters or at least find them interesting, I usually drop a book or drop a series. But the positives of the series outweigh the kind of poor character writing, in my opinion. So I will keep going, but it is something that I'm going to be looking out for. I'm going to hope that Jordan does a better job of writing character arcs and just creating more lovable characters. Okay, next is the climax of this book. I don't know what the heck was going on with this climax, but it fell so flat to me. It was really anticlimactic. It felt like the climax of the book just fell into the characters' laps and there was no build up to it. It just happened. And then it almost felt like it was also too easily won at the end too. So like they definitely struggled a bit, don't get me wrong, but I think there just should have been more pomp and circumstance around it. It was just too bland to me. I kept thinking like, that's it. This is the end. That's it. It almost felt like an afterthought. And it made the whole ending just feel really lackluster, which is not at all what I want in an 800-page book. I want it to build up to a really exciting finish. But that's okay. This is just the first book. Again, the positives outweigh this. So it wasn't that big of a deal, but I was just like, really? That's it. I also just didn't really love when everyone split up in the middle of the book. I know, like, if we're following Lord of the Rings, it happens there too. So, like, I don't know. But unfortunately, that thing happened that happens a lot of time in multi-POV stories where I don't care as much about certain POVs. Like, I was really glad that Moraine's group was cut for most of the time because I didn't really care about them. I could have done without the splitting up, but at the same time, like, whatever, it happens. It's fine. Also, I just want to say the romance between Nynaeve and Lan came out of nowhere. What the heck was that? I kind of knew it was coming because of the show, but at the same time, I didn't know if the show just kind of took liberties there because, you know, romance is very high concept. It's very easy to sell. So I didn't know if they just kind of shoehorned a romance into the show just to appease people, but like clearly they did not. So again, I kind of knew it was coming because of the show, but it still surprised me. Like I didn't know that they were actually going to go through with it, especially in this book. I would say with the end of that kind of encapsulates my negatives with this book. I really didn't have that many. And as I kept saying, they did not overshadow the positives. Even with things you like, there's going to be some little nitpicks you have. So now I just kind of want to move on and talk about some of my thoughts on the future of the series and what I'm feeling about the rest of the series. First, I just want to say, you know, I just want to get off my chest that I am really worried about continuing on in the series. I'm really worried that I'm going to get burnt out since these are long books. And I typically don't read a lot of long books. I'm a little bit worried about how I'm going to feel about the future of the series. I don't know. I hope that I still like it many books down the line, but I'm not sure. I found someone on Reddit that made this really awesome graphic of the word count of each of the books in the series. And when I looked at it, I saw that this was, The Eye of the World was kind of among the top books in the series as far as word counts go. So I am kind of looking forward to the next few books having a lower word count. I've also heard that Robert Jordan is kind of a menace when it comes to descriptions in these books. I don't think it was too terrible in this book. Like, I don't think he spent too long on descriptions ever. I'm assuming that criticism comes with the later books in the series, or it's just way over exaggerated, one of the two. But if it does truly come later in the series, I'm not looking forward to that either because I usually don't really like long descriptions anyways in books. And if his are like extra super long, I don't know, man, I'm not gonna like that. I'm also worried about getting to the infamous slog. Of course, anyone who's heard about Wheel of Time has heard about the slog. I am worried, but you know, for me, in my experience, a lot of times knowing the big complaints about something going into the series, if you know the complaints beforehand, it can kind of lessen the impact of those things. So I'm hoping that I don't find the slog terrible since I know it's coming, and maybe I won't even feel like it's a slog. Like, I don't know. I am just kind of glad to know beforehand that it's coming, but I am still a little worried about it. And my last little point on looking forward to the future of the series, I am really, really excited to see where some of the character journeys go, especially from hearing people talk about how much they love certain characters. I'm thinking they must have these amazing arcs. Like, Jordan must get so much better at writing them. So I'm really looking forward to seeing that. And I'm just really excited to see, because I think there was a line, like Moraine said something about all the Emmons Fielders being important in some way. Like, they're all important to this turning of the wheel or something like that. So I really am excited to see where Jordan takes that idea. In conclusion, even with my complaints and my concerns, I still had a great time reading The Eye of the World, and I can't wait to continue. So looking forward, I'm not sure that I'll do a standalone video for every book in the series. I did want to for this one, since it's the introduction to the entire thing, and I did have a lot to say about it. So I don't know, in the future, unless I have a ton to say about each book, I probably won't do a standalone video like this for all of them, but I will definitely talk about them. Like, I'm sure I'm going to at least want to talk about them. So I will in some capacity, just, you know, I'm not sure of the format. Also, I am not a fast reader. Disclaimer, not a fast reader at all. So I'm not going to be churning these out. I'm not going to be just constantly having Wheel of Time content. I am a slow reader, so I just want to put that out there. But I definitely do plan to continue. So I will be making more content on Wheel of Time. I just don't know when. And finally, if you have watched this far in the video, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate you being here. If you have any thoughts on the Wheel of Time in general, or thoughts on this book, no spoilers, please, of course, I would love to know them. Let me know what you think. Let me know all of your thoughts. thoughts. Anyways, that's all for me. I've spoken enough about this. I've yelled at you enough about this book. I'll just leave it at that. And I guess catch you in the next one. Have a really, really great day or morning or night wherever you are. Farewell.